Hi, my name is David Eichelt with David Richard Gallery, located here in Santa Fe, and I'm joined today with Adam Scott. Adam has just started working with us in our gallery. We're really excited about that, and this is a new exhibition of Adam's work called Terraforms. It's actually a whole new body of work that he's been working on, and we'll kind of talk about that today with him, sort of the inspiration and sort of what this is all about. Terraforms is opening today here in our gallery located in Santa Fe, and the opening is tonight between 5 and 7. We hope you make it, and Adam will be here for the opening and here all day, so you're welcome to stop by. And so what I'd like to do, Adam, is just like when we've been in your studio and talking about your work, I just sort of like that sort of spontaneity and how we both realized we had lots of common interest and excitement about the work. And your work is very different. I mean, your process is very different, the visual is very different, but it's not only just different, it's different from what you were doing for like the past decade. And so what I'd like to kind of touch on is a couple things. One is, what is Terraforms? What's it about? Points of inspiration. And also just some of the other things that we have talked about that are some of your other tangential interests, but yet they feed into and operate within your paintings. And so your paintings really bring in a lot of things, cultural as well as art historical, as well as just personal experiences, visual experiences. But the other thing too is, so let's talk about some of these specific paintings today, but also try and work in some of your processes are similar to what you were doing before.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so let's go and just start with this particular painting. This one's Terraform 17 called Sonic Fold.
Okay. This painting is actually the last one of this new series. So this is the last one really to be made. And just a little bit about the process that that occurs with this work, of the procedure. I like to use that term. I always like to find at the end of a series of paintings a doorway to a new possibility. Yes, it is different. So I feel that a series is successful if the last work, rather than a narrowing down, is actually an opening up to something that is, that seems to be on the horizon, right? So this painting, so always the last one for me is both, a kind of location point within a series, an existing series, and then again a kind of doorway to the next place. So so this one is really that. So I think it's good to start actually with this painting and talk about it.
And formally, this piece, and we'll move around in the gallery so all of you in the audience will be able to see other things. But this one is distinctly different in that Adam does like to use shaped canvases or altered sort of perimeters in his in their flat two-dimensional picture plane. But he also likes to sort of play with the shapes. But this one's sort of a flip of that.
It is.
It's you have this sort of diamond form, but what's also a little bit different is it's going off the picture plane.
Right. So there's so this one it's interesting because actually after this was made and it was like leaning up on the wall in my studio, back in Chicago. There were moments where I looked at this and I couldn't, it kind of in my peripheral vision, and I couldn't tell whether it was a square format or it was actually a shaped thing, and it kept oscillating between the two, which I think is also really interesting. That that just with positioning form, right? You can create a kind of, create an instability within what you think you're looking at, or the picture plane, So I think, so this one is I think, again, has shown me some new ways to think and act, in what's coming, right? So, but this one definitely, I would say, is probably also the most maximum, I would say maximum saturation, maximum saturated load of the various kinds of materials that I use in the work in the show. This one I feel like is like a culmination of those. The title, Sonic Fold, is kind of emblematic of the way I like to use titles, which especially when the work has become quite abstract like this, you know. So I think to me, actually, the more abstract the work gets, the more synesthetic my reaction to it. So meaning like this one almost does have like a sonic sensibility to me. Like I hear it. Like there's things that come to me, you know, when I was making this that seem to have a literal sonic kind of output, along with obviously like a pretty high key visual output. Yeah, and so I, you know, so that one, that's a place that this one kind of resides that I thought the sonic, you know, evoking the idea of sound or the sonic with this piece, I just think is like really apropos.
And this one actually also, it shows a couple of different things. One, it looks like a pouring technique.
It is, absolutely.
And this, in this one is probably one of the few examples where you have super saturated and then more dilute or you know, translucent layering of the pigment.
Yes.
But there's also something else going on at the same time. So if you look at these two, especially in this light, this looks like it's almost sort of pink magenta, and this looks like it's almost sort of a brown cranberry. But it's not. It's the same color.
Exactly.
But it's the light effect because of what you're doing with mixing in terms of fluorescence or pearlescence.
Yes, exactly. So these have, you know, these are interference colors that I like to use, that I've been using for actually quite a while. You know, in the work over probably since about 2001. Actually, I've been kind of loading up the pigments, the acrylic pigments that I use with silica, mica dust, which create these kind of interference optical effects. And now in this new body of work, this Terraforms series, I wanted to foreground that optical effect. And it's, you know, not only is it a, you know, not only is it a kind of color optical effect, meaning, you know, simultaneous contrast, which is a color theoretical, you know, idea, but also a physical manifestation of that, right? So so there's, you know, there's the kind of my worshiping of like Joseph Albers and Johannes Itten and all the, you know, all the kind of devotees of color theory in the 20th century, but also I want to take it to a point where actually there is a kind of bounce off, a physical bounce off the canvas. You know, light is hitting it, flying off, and shimmering and shifting, and that to me is like really fascinating.
And well, two things then kind of come out of that that are operating here. One is by adding these things to the paint, to the acrylic paint, you're giving it a volume.
Yes,
and a depth.
Yeah.
So these, if you know, when you look at these paintings, what you'll see is a lot of texture. So there's a lot of tactility, and you'll really see it, which we haven't gotten to yet, in this purple, where these sort of look like they've been sort of cut or chopped with a piece of wood or something. There's no brush work going on.
No, not at all. No.
These all look like they've been sort of poured, so they have sort of this juicy lushness about them.
Yeah, I haven't used a brush since the day I left grad.
We're not talking about your hair. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
So, yeah, no, I mean, either that too. I think the not brushing the hair and not brushing the paintings happens simultaneously.
There's a relationship.
I know, that happens.
Simultaneous.
Right, simultaneous.
But the other thing too that I think is really interesting is the surface has become very active now because of what you were just describing in terms of the interference paint. So now when you look at these paintings and you move around, you're getting all these, you're seeing one color here and a different here, one color here and a different one here. And
yeah, and so that has a lot to do with how I also just think about these in toto, all of the work here, which is that I do actually, I think of these as objects, and you know, and so because I think of them as objects, meaning like this thing, this is a thing. Paintings are objects to me, you know. And that's because I'm a child of 20th century painting, you know, and that's the kind of the way that mindset is that this is a thing that lives in space in front, and you put your body in front of it, you know, and then there's also something pictured, right? So it's that tension between what's pictured and thingness, you know, objectness and the possibility of the pictorial, you know, and so it's those two poles, right, that I want to work with, and that this work absolutely I think is really speaking to more than any work that I've done in the past.
Oh,
and then, oh yeah, absolutely, this work is really getting at that idea. And so, back to your point about moving your body around these, right? It's really about spectatorship, you know, and how spectatorship affects and changes these paintings, you know, and so I love that. I love the idea of that having multiple body positions in front of this work, you know. So I engineered the paint to respond to to the body.
But also,
position.
what happens is we happen to be standing in this room that's all glass on that opposite wall, and what I think is interesting about this painting is, you know, in the morning we get direct sunlight in here, and then in the afternoon it's, you know, it faces east, so we don't get direct sunlight. But these things totally change throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the other thing too. So there's this kinetic aspect in terms of the viewer,
yes. Yeah.
but there's also the fact that whether it's artificial or natural light, these things change and have a very different vibe and feel, which also makes them a little challenging to photograph. But it's what really, I think, is making these paintings interesting. Right. Now, the other reason why I wanted to start with this one is this one also reminds me, and maybe it's just this curvaceous nature or what have you, but your previous body of works,
yes,
which were more figurative and representational,
right,
were also done with this sort of
right,
technique.
yes, absolutely.
But this is one of the few that has these sort of curvy elements in it.
Yes, and this is a, you know, so I have as any painter has or any artist has a series of moves you make, you know, and those moves are in this new body of work I feel like I've augmented those moves, you know, and the more geometric manifestations in this work are really I feel like the augmentation. But the use of really thick, viscous, poured, as you said, like juicy paint, that's something I've been doing for quite a while. And so, you know, so the way I am as an artist is I'm always kind of trying to augment what I'm doing, right? Trying to find new ways of, you know, of making objects and images. But then also I've got moves that I feel like are integral to the process, you know, so what I can do is reintroduce those, you know, so it's kind of augmenting everything and then reintroducing what I feel like is strong, you know.
Or and permuting.
Yeah, sure, kind of permutation. Approach. So, so this one really is, I'd say this is, you know, a true kind of hybrid of the two, you know, of this kind of, and you know, this is where I think, you know, this kind of move here with that is in a lot of the other work in the show. That move to me, it feels like a kind of it has a rhythm, and therefore to me, when something has a rhythm, it connotes a kind of sonic. There's a sonic connotation to that.
Like a sound wave.
Yeah, like a sound wave, like a waveform. You know? And so that's that. But then also to bring these. So really, you know, what's interesting with this kind of method is that it is a kind of recording of flow. It's a literal recording. These kind of moves are a kind of recording of paint, flow, and gravity. You know. And then this is an introduction of an actual body rhythm that I'm making. So this one really, you know, has kind of, I feel like that's why I feel like it's kind of a seminal piece within the show, kind of capping off this first series that I'm doing with you, and then also opening up to the next vista, you know, which I think is like really, I think is just always a good thing. You know?
So Adam, let's move to this painting here, and what I'd like to have you talk about is the inspiration for this body of work, because it is distinct, as we've already said, from your earlier work. And this one's definitely much more geometric and has sort of a tectonic feel to it. And also the surface is different. And so what I'd like for you to do is talk about sort of what were the origins for this new body of work called Terraforms, and sort of then how these shapes sort of relate to that influence.
Okay. Well, my wife Julie Whaley and myself started going out to Joshua Tree, California from Chicago, where I'm a professor of drawing and painting at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And my wife is also an artist, and we work in Chicago. But we, and originally we are actually from the West Coast. I grew up in the Santa Monica, Venice area, and my wife grew up in the Central Valley of California. So we see ourselves kind of as always these kind of transplants from the West Coast to Chicago, you know. But we, but my orientation personally had always been to the ocean. And growing up in Venice and California, I'd grown up surfing and, you know, a very kind of Pacific Ocean oriented space.
Right.
So, you know, landscape, the ubiquitous horizon of the Pacific Ocean, but then also, you know, surfing culture is, what's interesting about that is it's a way to understand form. It's a way to put your body onto form, actually. Yeah, you know, because waveforms, your body, this thing, form, it's like understanding form on a very primal level. Anyway, so...
You're sort of integrating with that.
Form, yeah. I think people who, surfers, skateboarders, those people know what, they have a body relation to form, which is, I think, always fascinating. So anyway, so we started, you know, in about 2011, we started going out to, we wanted to go out to California during the break between semesters. So we decided, we started going to LA and staying in Venice around there, you know, the old stomping ground. But then we became interested in going out to the desert, and Joshua Tree held a kind of special place in our hearts, primarily because of the music connection to Joshua Tree, like Graham Parsons, you know, and you know, and the Rolling Stones being out there, and Donovan having a house out there, Eric Burden having a house, you know. So there's this whole lot of mythology of Joshua Tree. So we just kind of went out there and just kind of found it, you know. But then upon renting a place and spending about a month there, we just were blown away by the absolute, how the landscape is really muscular, how the forms in the national park and around the national park are really hyper-specific to that area, like nothing else. Really nothing else, even in the whole swath, I would say the southwestern part of the United States. That little piece of the Mojave Desert over there is just from some other, literally from some other planet, you know. So what happened was we just were very affected by it, and I started drawing out there, and really in a very just kind of, you know, casual way. We're hiking, we would hike during the day, I would be drawing, and you know, and kind of reconnecting with landscape, which my previous work had been very, very kind of nested into. But my previous work, say from about 2001 to about 2009-ish, was landscape in a conventional sense, with horizons and, you know, and perspectival analysis of that. But then Joshua Tree completely reoriented it, kind of unscrewed my head, wiped my brain out, and placed new data in there. And a lot of that was very tactile, right? So that data was actually, what's interesting is it wasn't as much this kind of traditional, almost, you know, 19th century, which we have, you know, we kind of have that as landscape data, 19th century, you know, framing, to an actual being in the landscape, touching things, processing the landscape through your body. And so that's something that really became interesting to me. So it's, you know, so
just to be clear, your older paintings, just so people don't walk away thinking, oh, he was a traditional landscape painter.
No,
they were not. So there was always some interesting hook or sort of pop-esque element or trippy element.
There was.
And so there was just sort of this look like the houses were sort of melting away.
True. And that's all there. That was there. But it just had the horizon.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. There was a sort of formal aspect, but they were just amazing pictures.
Oh, thank you.
But so back to this one. Because this one does have sort of a windswept look about it.
And so I guess the point being is that that what's interesting to me is being in that landscape in Joshua Tree. The way it affected me was it was less. It made me want to reflect on it or manifest it in paintings in a less traditionally pictorial way.
Right.
Okay. And in a much more physical object way, you know, and that also happened to coincide with you know, this kind of just like getting back into drawing, you know, which I hadn't done for a while. My previous work, I had created that in a digital space. A lot of that was found imagery that I would put together digitally, and then I would make paintings based on that. So I think one thing I can say about this show, is this show is a product of me finding my hands again, and that to me is like everything.
Well, there is such a tactility about them, and as you said earlier, an objectness about them. So for me, it seems like when I really sort of studied your older work previous work, and then this work. And you had a pretty big gap in the not a gap, but just a pretty big period in the transition, sort of working through this.
You have to, yeah, I had to.
And it wasn't like flipping a switch.
No.
But what it seems like you went from was sort of viewing something to feeling something.
Yes, to being something.
Yeah, it's more experiential.
Absolutely,
so it's definitely inspired by the same sort of imagery, landscape, or whatever. But this is moving more towards how you sort of feel it or become one with it. And so that's why this surface too is really interesting. And this one you said has iron in it.
Yeah,
right?
it's iron oxide.
Totally has a different look.
Iron oxide and mica dust. Also, there is also silica dust in here, which then creates this almost like metal. It's interesting. Like when I finished this painting, I felt like I was looking at like Coritan steel or something like that, or the kind of the vibes you get when you run your hand across like a Richard Serra. You know what I mean? Like something like that. This kind of heaving, heavy. This painting actually is extremely heavy. Actually, it's literally heavy. But So earth. So here's the interesting. So it's place, earth, body. Right, body experience with the earth, with place, as a catalyst. Though here's the thing: that the landscape is catalyst and not necessarily just a kind of detached viewing, but a kind of immersion into.
Right.
Okay. That's the deal.
Well, it's getting right back to what you said about the comparative to how surfers and skateboarders use their body to become one with the landscape.
Exactly. It's understanding form in a body on a kind of DNA body level. And so that happened with this work, and I would also say that kind of the next, the very next sensation when you're thinking about body, immersion, space, touching, hands, right? The next sensation, I think, it kind of rises up to mind, and then what you start to have what I felt were the kind of like beautiful kind of hallucinations that come from that, and then there's this kind of which I think is like truly, to evoke the word psychedelic, that to me is the way I would come to something, that is actually I would say consciousness altering. That art, right, as an artist, being altered by landscape and then trying to manifest things that maybe have, like, exist on a frequency of trying to actually alter the space around them or the viewer's perception, that's interesting to me.
So is that sort of, because there's a stark contrast between this ground and the blue, which are interference paint, I'm guessing, or pearlescent.
Yes, and that's injected into that too. And I would say one other layer to this work is while my wife and I were out in Joshua Tree spending this time and being there and just being silent and drawing and looking and things like that, I also kind of rekindled my interest in science fiction and speculative fiction literature, and that was kind of going into my head also. I mean, I feel like we live in interesting times, so I think that I wanted to also have these works posit kind of questions about what does it mean to paint or to think about an artist interacting with the landscape in 2017. You know what I mean? What does that mean to do? What does it mean to maybe actually be witnessing some of the last landscapes? We will have. There is a kind of so there is an underlayment here of which I think to me, art has always done, especially 20th century, which has been a kind of both a celebration of material and a kind of celebration of material and making and manifesting, but also also a kind of walking the line between that celebration and also looking at things that are kind of, you know, maybe looming in the distance, you know. And so there's, you know, I mean, it's, you know, to me that's what, you know, good, for me, serious art does. And that's what I want, you know, that's kind of what I want to communicate through this work. But I would say that, you know, to view these paintings is to view them on many, many levels. It can be just a pure enjoyment of, of materiality. It could be thinking about, you know, wow, yeah, landscape. It could also be thinking about, like, what are these things actually? Are these, does this exist in Joshua Tree? Like, you know, where is this? You know, is this, or, you know, or are these kind of artificial extrusions from some other world? You know what I mean? So I mean, that I want all of that kind of, that to be kind of operated, or all those frequencies to be operated.
Well, I think that's the interesting thing is they're clearly abstractions,
yeah.
But they're definitely conceptual. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
And some of the paintings, like I think the next one we'll go to, really I think shows also a little bit more of a geometric aspect to this body of work,
which is a new thing. That shape, yeah. That's a very new thing for me.
But again, that's sort of not in keeping when you think about a landscape. You think of, but again, they are organic forms. Right. They are, you know, molecular type forms, and so there is a nice conceptual underpinning in these that's rooted in something. Yeah. But like you said, you can just also just enjoy them for the pure aspect of what you see. It doesn't sound like Frank Stella, but what you see is what you see.
I know that's important. All that work is important to me. Yeah. Stella and Lewis and Frankenthaler, you know, and Olitsky. I mean, that kind of post-painterly tradition, you know, was something that I've always thought was a kind of, I actually think that's a tradition that hasn't even really been properly unpacked, actually. It kind of came out in such a blast, you know, that it happened and everyone kind of dug it. But I do think, you know, the ramifications of it are with us still, you know, and I think it's just great. I just think it's a great kind of area to work with now, you know, in 2017, and to kind of to think about those kind of issues along with new ones, you know, that are present here in this time period.
So this particular painting, the title, refresh my memory. It's
Terraform 13, and it's Moon Moth.
Moon Moth.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things in this painting, as we were talking about earlier, that are really kind of interesting, and that also demonstrate some of the points about this body of work that we haven't talked about. One is, we've talked about the surfaces in terms of the lushness and sort of the palette. But also, what's really important is because of the way you've changed the paint, you've altered the paint so that it has this thickness and texture and it doesn't just flatten out. You're actually sculpting.
Yes, absolutely.
So these surfaces
very much so. Yeah.
Are very much sculpted, which also kind of makes them a little bit more object-like.
Yes.
So was that intentional, or was that sort of a fallout of your process?
It was. You know, I feel that the actually sculptural quality of my work has always been there. I just think, again, it's a concentration of what's always been there. You know, so all of this work in this show is.
So it's more apparent here because these are told a bit more abstract.
Yes, absolutely, and it's so fascinating when you just simply when you reorient. Okay, all painting has the same DNA. All painting in the world has the same DNA. Right. What we do as artists is we mutate, change, recombine, you know, put different elements in, and then what we have is we create new things with that, right? So I think, you know, so the same
or new
perspectives, right? So I think, you know, you just take the material thickness, the muscular nature of it, the hypersaturation, you know, all that stuff has always been in the work. What I did was I just kind of freed it of some things that I think were kind of cognitive toggle switches for the viewer. You know, you kind of go to representational things first instead of material. So simply just taking those out, which is really the story, I think, of 20th century abstraction. You know, and that's where I see myself really being now fully engaged in that.
And several of these, this is a particularly good example, which is why we picked it, but are representational. I mean, the title is evocative of it,
Sure,
but it
sure.
also does
Right.
sort of look
Right.
like wings.
Yeah, it does. And then, so all of these are...
And this fanning
Yes,
really accentuates
absolutely.
that.
All of these, so again, all of these paintings, I see them as objects. They're things, they're paintings, they're real. This is real, this is a thing. And it's showing something, right? And, and I really, ultimately think that all painting really, it deals in various spectrums of representation ultimately, and one can kind of engineer all of the kind of recognizable things out of something, and I just think you're still never escaping representation. I just think that's kind of impossible, but that's also one of the great things about painting, because I like to call painting the concrete fiction, the concrete and the fictive, right? This thing, what this may be, I mean, again, this isn't, it could be a space, it's not a space, those issues of what you actually see, of how you're actually perceiving something, the tension between the thing and what's being perceived on the thing, all that stuff is, I feel like, is kind of happening in each one of these paintings is kind of like a centrifuge that's spinning, that's separating that stuff out and creating tensions therein. But definitely, this one, this shape, which does kind of appear in some works here, in the show, kind of vibrations of works in the show with the shape, and then certainly there's some other works that have this, shape in them. This one, when I made it, I thought this had a kind of, I actually thought it had like the perfume of something possibly organic, kind of moving through space, and so, that's where you can drop a title in there that just is like another little mini catalyst to possible meaning,
And the hot pink here, again, in the pearlescence or in the interference effect, also tends to make it a little bit more trippy, to get you kind of back to your original thought about sort of the tilt towards psychedelia. I don't think you're doing, I think painting should be an absolute... It's illusory to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yes, exactly. It's not it is real and it's not real, right? Simultaneously. It's like the object and it's like the ghost. It's like the presence and the absence of presence, right? Always painting is that. That's why painters are such a trippy lot, They really are. And different than sculptors in a way, and different mind than sculptures actually. But what I wanted to do was bring that kind of sculptural vibe right to the surface, right to the brink of objectness, and then stop. But the high key color and the psychedelic, I think. I actually think that this idea of psychedelia, right, is a very human-made thing. Like, psychedelia, we humans created these ideas for ourselves to ponder and to celebrate and to have wash over our minds. So I think actually what's interesting is there's a kind of artificiality. You know what I'm saying? Psychedelia uses these colors that are pushed. Everything's pushed, right? You don't, maybe a few things in nature have kind of psychedelic coloring, but really humans, we're the authors of a lot of psychedelic thinking. And so I think that, taking something that feels earthen, having something like this that has a kind of earthen, heavy, leaden quality, and then just juxtaposing it with something that's just like this searing pink color that, that just comes out of, this kind of crazy acrylic paint, I just think it's a great juxtaposition. I just think it really kind of pushes those two things really hard.
But the other thing too, with high key colors and highly contrasting colors, and definitely the use of interference paints and things where you see one thing one way and one thing another, what it does is it activates the eye. And it simply makes the mind more receptive to suggestion.
Yes, exactly.
And so
exactly.
It
opens up the nervous system.
Because you already are questioning, like, why that? Why this? And what's that all about? And so once you start doing that, you're you've already opened up the door for possibility.
You're in. Exactly. I think it's a sense of seduction right? And then, you know, what psychedelia is this? A seduction into, right? And then once you're in, that's when they slip you the brown acid.
It's advertising. It's Madison Avenue.
You know what I'm saying? It's that idea of like, it's like Jean Genet, the great poet Jean Genet talked about, you know, seduction and betrayal. You know, you seduce in and then you shift it up. And you give other people other things to think about. And, you know, that has always been a kind of maxim for me.
Yeah, and I think artists really, you play that to your advantage to make people be receptive to a new reality or an alternative reality.
Yes, of course.
And then what that does is allow you to create like your sort of narrative, and then you can follow along.
Exactly, right.
But, yeah, this is a really good example of that one, I think. So this one, let's sort of wrap up our talk with this one because it kind of comes full circle to where we started. There's curvilinear forms in here. It's also a diamond shape, but it's literally a diamond shape. The other one was evocative of a diamond shape. This one's very literal. Also very interesting colors operating here and surfaces, but also interesting forms here now. So, and I'm bringing together multi-items, you know, in here. So what we're trying to do is just show a range of this work. And but why don't you go ahead and just talk a little bit more about this one in terms of what's really operating in here?
Okay. So this one is called Surface Slider, and so on a formal level, on just like on a paint level, and on a procedural level, I wanted to juxtapose velocity and movement with stasis. Okay. I will say though that I think a lot of the work in here, you know, has those qualities of velocity and stasis, you know, something that's almost frozen and truncated, and yet something that's moving and pulsating, you know, simultaneously. So I want, you know, that's interesting to me. You know, you could almost say a lot of this work, you know, the 20th century gesture, you know, has been like I'm freezing it, like I'm taking it. You know, and it's almost like a gesture trapped in amber or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like you know what I mean? Like when I say the gesture, I mean like the gesture. You know, the promise of the gesture that you know, de Kooning and Klein and you know Lee Krasner. You know what I mean? We're offering, right? But what does it mean to deal with a gesture now? To me, I feel like to do that, you have to trap it and freeze it and analyze it. You know, and then allow it to kind of exist in this kind of sometimes almost up close like this, almost as if it's under an electron microscope or something. But I will say, you know, so again, this is like velocity and stasis, and so I wanted to see how you could kind of track or trace this movement through this painting, while at the same time having these very kind of thick, you know, areas of liquid paint that really I do think create a kind of grounding for it, you know. Also the color here, using so much of this mica, silica, iron oxide, but also within this interference paint, creates this color that, you know, I don't quite know how to describe. Like I want, you know, I guess it kind of presents as like a purple, but I'm not really sure.
It's like a plummy brown.
It's a plummy brown, you know. Yeah. And I want it to be almost like a, maybe not a non-color, but a kind of something that's, you know, always like the court's really out on what color this is next to something like this, which is very obviously this like electrified blue color. You know? So I want those two things happening. So that's kind of a procedural aspect. But then, you know, I was really interested in watching this, having this kind of rhythmic trail slide all through this, but then in pieces breaking that up. You know, breaking up that, like stopping it and starting it again, you know. And in terms of place and in terms of topography, you know, this has to do with the tracks I see when we're out in the desert of rattlesnakes. You know, you walk somewhere and you've seen like snake tracks. You know, that's only one kind of animal that can make tracks that look like that. You know, because the snake is, you know, so I mean the snake, or the, you know, like the reptile or the snake or something reptilian. I also feel like maybe lives in this work, maybe, you know, but I think that certainly the trace of something that happened
right.
is very much here, right? So
well, and because you do get this sort of sidewindy sort of, you know, where you're keeping this rhythm going, but at the same time, it's evocative of some sort of a track or
exactly. And these rhythms and these like shapes, you know, these shapes really hold the diamond shape of this canvas, you know, or kind of mimic that, where I wanted something to kind of also like push against that or be curvilinear within the kind of regimen.
Well, it's like, yeah, like successful shaped canvases, what is integral in the painting becomes integral with the shape.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when they're tied like that, that's when they're really, really successful.
I think so, yeah.
And even though this isn't like, you know, I mean, it's a diamond, it's not like the hex or some of the other shapes, but still, this diamond form really, I don't know if it's the diamond form or what, but it really makes you pick up on what's happening with the flow, with this rhythm here on the sides. Yeah,
and I mean, these almost, you know, and I think one of the procedures, or I should say the procedure in terms of pouring, because this area is like poured, and this area is thick, heavy paint that is kind of sculpted. So there are these two things going on. And in the poured sections, what you get, what it actually ends up looking like to me, and it's always kind of looked like this, is almost a cross section. As if this painting was like 20 feet long and you actually just took a core sample of it. And that's interesting to me too. Like that these feel like they could keep going, and some, you know, you mentioned that earlier, how some of these, not all of them, but some of them, or the one we talked about first, the sonic fold painting.
Yes.
That one, you felt like that had a kind of, it wanted to keep going, where there's a sense of a continuation. I think that this one, for me, the sense of its continuation is actually a kind of one emanating from the painting. So this could be like a large, solid jelly roll diamond thing that you just take a slice of, right? And it's this like, it does have that kind of thing. I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, I just think the color is fascinating. I love the combination of these two colors because they really contrast well. Yeah. That's a great painting. Well, I hope everybody can join us during this show. It's going to be up through November 11th. And we'll have a catalog online and, of course, a checklist. But anyway, just hope you can come by and see us. We'll be, again, this is Dave Richard Gallery. We're at 1570 Pacheco Avenue in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thank you.